what I'm going to suggest, Luke, is if you start off by introducing yourself, and then if you want to pick somebody on the screen to then be the next person that you introduce. Obviously, whoever gets Margaret and Bob, if you can make sure you pick Margaret first, somebody else, and then Bob next. Right? Thank you just now, guys. Over to you, Luke.
Great, thanks, Alistair. Yep, hello everyone. So my name's Luke Emerton and I'm a Community Development and Engagement Officer with EDVA, which stands for East Dunbartonshire Voluntary Action. So we basically support charities and community groups, sort of third sector organisations within East Dunbartonshire. And we are the very uncatchy title, the TSI, the third sector interface for East Dunbartonshire. And there's one of those in each local authority area in Scotland. So that's myself. Okay, I'll pass over to just next on my screen, I'll go to Eileen.
Sound on. Yeah, Eileen Thompson here. I'm a non-executive director of Q and Review. I've been working with Alistair and more lately Andy for a wee while now. And I'm really interested in what we're going to speak about tonight. Looking forward to it.
Eileen, who would you like to pass on to?
Ian.
Hello all, I'm Ian. I'm the studio coordinator for Q and Review Print Speaking to the Blind. I'm hoping to learn a bit more about how the board works tonight. My normal duties are just getting the podcasts out and making sure the recording schedule, liaising with the volunteers, that kind of thing. But yeah, looking forward to this meeting. And I'm over to Howell.
Hello there, good evening. I'm Howell Jones. I'm one of the volunteer readers with Q and Review. So I do Monday morning and Wednesday morning reading from the Glasgow Times and also from the National. So who's next? Margaret, is it?
Right, Margaret, I will unmute you. Just 1 second, Margaret. And now, wait a minute. Why can't I unmute you? Make a presenter, pin for me, disable mic. Margaret, I think we can actually hear you. Do you want to speak, Margaret?
Yourself, Alistair.
Margaret, can you manage to unmute yourself, or can Bob help you? Disable mic, disable camera. It's not letting me do it, Margaret. If
There you go. Is that it?
That's you now, Margaret. We can all hear you.
Right, thanks, Bob. Hi, I'm Margaret Wilkie, and I'm joint chair of East Dunbartonshire Visually Impaired People's Forum.
And Margaret, what's your interest in tonight? Can you?
Well, I was asked if I wanted to actually take part, and as we are users of Q and Reviews, Kirkintilloch Herald, and all the rest, we thought it would be a good idea if we actually got involved.
Margaret, I'll pay you that £5 later. Thank you for saying that. She didn't, by the way, Ian, say whether we're any good or not, but she is a user, so that's good news. So thank you for that, Margaret. Now, Margaret, do you want to invite Andy to speak?
Yes. Andy, could you speak, please?
Yeah, no worries at all. Good evening, everybody. My name's Andy Cyril. I've known Alistair for many, many years since school. And Alistair's asked me just to support, predominantly from an advisory perspective, just some of the activities in Q and Review. I have a fair bit of business experience and understand about compliance and governance within a business, but never had any experience of that aspect of charity work. So very much looking forward to hearing what is going to be said tonight.
And Andy, could I suggest that you introduce Bob?
Yeah, go for it, Bob.
Hi, I'm Bob McNichol. 1 second, take to Margaret.
Right.
There's still feedback. 1 second. Disappeared downstairs. Aye.
Oh wait.
I went round.
Oh, Bob,
I'm
I
going to
think
leave.
that's cool. Don't
I'll
go
come in
falling
with
down.
Margaret.
Don't go falling down the stairs or anything, Bob. Oh, right. He's going to sit in with Margaret. I think that's what you said there. Is that right? That's us. Karen, do you want to introduce yourself to Snow?
Well, my name's Karen McPhee. I've been involved in talking newspapers for about 40 years, and I've been on committees, probably for about 30 years. So yeah, it's always good to just refresh the knowledge and just remind yourself of the stuff that you've forgotten. So yeah, that's why I'm interested tonight. If I ping it back over to Bob and he can do the introductions for himself.
That's great. Now, Bob, I'll just unmute you, Bob. Just 1 second. I've now figured out what I need to do.
Right,
Go for it.
Bob
That's you.
Involved with the East Dunbartonshire Visually Impaired Forum. Currently, I'm the treasurer. You also use Q and Review, talk newspapers, etc. Brilliant service, and I'm here to find out more and hopefully learn something.
Fantastic, Bob. Bob, I think you actually get a tenner tonight because Margaret only said that she used the service. She didn't say we were brilliant, so you get double the prize. I didn't say who was actually paying it, mind you. That's the only problem. Have we got anyone left to still introduce? No, we're all introduced. Brilliant. Well, basically, I introduce myself then. For those that don't recognise my voice, I'm Alistair McPhee. I'm the founder of Q and Review, and I used to be involved probably about 50 years ago now, nearly, in Strathkelvin Talk newspaper when it was first getting set up. And but since then, I've obviously been running Q and Review for about 40 years. And one of the things tonight is obviously we're really keen, Margaret and Bob, in getting more of our listeners involved in the decision-making process, be that through a subcommittee setup, be it through simply feedback more often from our listeners, or be it from having people who are users on our board as well. That would be the ultimate goal if we're able to achieve that. But that's the last time that I'm going to speak tonight because apparently I'm supposed to be saving my voice, which is, for those that know me, is something I don't normally do, Margaret. So I will now shush and pass you all over to Luke.
Thanks, Alistair. So I think I'm going to share a few slides on the screen, but I'm going to cover everything which is on the slides. They're just for kind of additional information, and I will, well, not additional information, just the information that we're discussing. And what I'll do is I'll send through copies of those to Alistair as well, and we can have a chat if there's any other sort of versions of those needed as well. So I'm just going to share those just now. Can everyone see that okay? Okay, Alistair, great, thank you very much. Okay, so so just gonna explain just a quick overview of what we're going to do this evening. So just going to go have a little bit of a starting point in terms of having a bit of a think about what's the setup for Q and Review in terms of sort of the legal form that Q and Review has, and then from that, what are the legal duties of being on the board really. A little bit about what that means in practice, some practical things for that, and then have a little bit of think about what office bearer roles are. So that is what roles are typically on a committee. So that it would include things like the chair and the treasurer and the secretary as well. So often organisations will sometimes have other roles on the board, and I know, for example, that is the case for yourselves. You've got various sort of roles on that, really. So just sort of starting point, so Q Review is a limited company with charitable status, and so that basically means that the Q Review is subject to company law, and directors must comply with the duties required by directors through the Companies Act. And also it's a charity, so it's therefore subject to the Charities and Trustee Investment Act, and it means that all the operations of Q Review, because it's a registered charity, then it comes under the oversight of OSCR, which stands for the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator. And so from a charity law perspective, the board members are known as charity trustees. So you might hear the term board member or trustee being used. But for charities, that's effectively the same thing. So just before we get into that, just thought it might be just interesting just to have a very quick think about. So that sounds like a lot of legal things which we need to bear in mind. So bearing that all in mind, why become a charity trustee? So there's around, in Scotland, there's around 25,000 charities at the moment, and the majority of those are small charities. You do obviously get big national charities, but the majority of those are kind of smaller local charities. So really, why should people be interested in becoming involved as a charity trustee? So I don't know if anyone wants to just share a kind of why they are at the moment, or potentially why they would be interested in getting involved, before we kind of go on to just some of the duties and responsibilities. So if anyone wants to come in, I can tell you what, I might just stop sharing just for one moment. So any thoughts just really on why should anybody want to become a charity trustee?
So am I right in saying then, I guess I'm going to answer your question with another question. So it strikes me that company directors, you could equate a charitable trustee to being just a company director, and is it, broadly speaking, the same responsibilities?
Yes. That's a good way of summarising it. So we're going to go through the responsibilities just shortly of being a company director, and then the responsibilities of being a charity trustee. And you'll see that there's a large amount of overlap between the two. And so yeah, it's effectively it's overseeing I suppose the governance of the charity. Is the predominant role within that. And I suppose any ideas why people might want to get involved then? If that's...
I mean, I think I freely admit to being a bit of a control freak. So I'm happy to be a volunteer, happy to be a reader or a producer, or an envelope stuffer or whatever. But I also like to kind of help to run things. I haven't done it for a long time, but I used to help to run everything. And so yeah, I mean, I think that plays a little bit of part of it. People who want to deliver the service, the core service that you're with, but also people who want to help make that happen in the background.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, Karen.
Yeah, it's Eileen here. I would agree with that as well, and I think I've been non-exec director on another couple of boards, one of them university board, and it's about, you're right, it's about making things happen. It's trying to help things along, and hopefully the expertise that we've got from the work that we've done elsewhere will help build the charity up so that it delivers even more for the users. I think that.
Great.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I think Margaret was wanting to come in.
Yeah, I'm already a trustee of the East Dunbartonshire Visually Impaired Forum, but I'm also an accountant, or was an accountant, and I was also at one point in time a trustee and board member of Silver Birch. I'm sure you'll all know Silver Birch. And I was there when we actually bought Lochmill and moved the premises out to Lochmill. one of the reasons why I'm trying to get involved or wanting to get involved is because I am now severely visually impaired, which has had a tremendous effect on my life, as it has on everybody with a visual impairment. And we are trying to make sure that people have access to what they actually require in their day-to-day lives. And that is what we're trying to put forward within our forum. So Q Review sort of merges in with that, because one of the things that we don't have access to if you're severely visually impaired is you don't have access to newspapers unless you have them online. So the local newspaper is very good for us and lets us know what is actually happening online. So we're just trying to give back to something that is actually quite dear to our hearts. That's it.
Great, thanks, Margaret. That's fantastic. Yeah. So
I think also, Margaret, I think the other thing is, one of the things for me about trying to get visually impaired people involved is also emphasising the variety of visual impairment that there actually is. That again, everybody thinks of visual impairment as total blindness, and the vast majority of people are not totally blind. They have some level of sight. But there's then also the fact that so many organisations, I was talking to somebody earlier on today, and I was saying that basically there is an element of do as I say, not as I do, from public bodies in particular. And the likes of the RNIB points out there's actually 4,350 people living with sight loss in East Dunbartonshire alone, at varying degrees of sight loss. And again, Karen, you were actually talking to somebody today about their use of an Alexa device. Do you want to bring that story forward?
I can bring that story forward for you.
Oh, fire away, Margaret. Yep.
Because I actually have 3 Alexa devices in my house.
Well done.
I have one in the kitchen, one in my front lounge, and one in the room that we're in just now. And I find them exceptionally useful. And that is how I now listen to the Kirkintilloch Herald and the other newspapers. Previously, it was only the Kirkintilloch Herald I could get when it was the old boombox. But now I can get more because of the way that the thing's set up for me to get the Kirkintilloch Herald through Q Review. So that is very good. But I use Alexa for music. I use it for cooking, for timing everything. I use it for the weather. I can just use it to get the time. I use it as an alarm. Can use it as an alarm clock. Alexa is so very useful, and through Q Review, quite a few.
I was just about to say it's going to wake up in a minute if you keep saying its name.
Through using it, though, and through Q Review, a lot of our members have now all got Alexas, and they are all finding it exceptionally useful. So it's a fantastic tool, because we don't have to look at anything, we just have to use our voices, and it is great.
It's Bob here.
Hi, Bob.
I'd just like to reiterate what Margaret's just said there. I also use it. I have the Alexa earbuds.
Okay.
So I can use the top newspapers, the Q Review on the go. But it's also tied in with my mobile phone contacts. So when somebody phones me, if Margaret phones me, it actually announces who's calling me. So I just double tap my earbud to answer the call, double tap to hang up. If I'm out and about, I just need to say, Alexa, call Margaret VIP. And I don't have to.
Margaret Wilkie, Margaret Hutchison, or Margaret.
Stop! So,
sorry.
What I'll do is I'll put this one in privacy. But it's so handy, and it is one big learning process. We were involved just recently through yourselves with the new Alice skill that's been developed. And again, they're needing the feedback from people who have all sorts of disability, visual impairments, or etc. So I'm same as Margaret. I just want to give back what you guys have given us.
Basically, the reason, Margaret and Bob, that I was asking for that is that one of the things for us as potential and current board members is that obviously we're under, there's lots of discussions about the future of talking newspapers, what's going to be happening in the next 5 or 10 years. I know that Howell, for example, with his background in the BBC, Ian, it was Ian's father who was one of the founders of Strathkelvin Talking Newspaper, and Ian is continuing that process. But there is this: what will the future hold? Will we all be on a system, and will Q and Review itself be needed? And I think that's where there needs to be a balance on our board between people who are excited about AI and the way technology is changing, but then also there needs to be a reality of what visually impaired people themselves are currently using. And although I have a visual impairment, again, it can't be from me. Basically, it needs to be from the wider visual impaired community.
I agree with that. And one of the things that we are doing at the forum is actually trying to support people, because the one thing that we don't actually have is when you are actually told you're either visually impaired or severely visually impaired, the consultant tells you that, and that's the end of it. You don't get any other help from them. So we're trying to get our forum to actually understand that there are things out there that we can do, that can happen, and it makes their lives a lot easier to to live. And that's how we have changed the forum in the last year. I know you all think that we were actually a campaigning group, but we're not a campaigning group now. It's more to do with health and welfare and how we live our lives.
Well, basically, look, before handing back to you, I think what we're trying to do here is sort of say that there is a role for Q and Review's board to actually be more aware of what the community needs and respond more to what is needed in terms of the audio provision that we provide, but also from the point of view of our building, what our building can be used for moving forward as well. Okay, so I promise now I will shush.
Well,
no, thanks, Alistair. That's great.
One of the things you're looking at is actually perhaps having some sessions with the forum in Bishopbriggs, because we have one chap in Bishopbriggs who is visually impaired and lives not far from your offices, and he's desperate to meet other people that are in the same position. So yeah, we might come to a Q and Review and ask to use your offices for meetings.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I think that's a really good just kind of snapshot of I suppose of why people do get involved within boards. I suppose it's that bringing that, like you say, lived experience or experience from from other professions even, and being able to give something back and make a difference, really, to shape the service going forward and really make impact more and more people, really. So, and then there's also a lot of skills that people do learn from being on the board as well. So I think it's certainly it's definitely a two-way thing, I think, in terms of being able to give towards it, but then also get a lot back from it in terms of it's a very rewarding thing to get involved with. So that's great. I'm just going to share my slides again. So just going to quickly go through the duties of under the Companies Act of being a director, and then also of the sort of the charity trustee duties as well that are sort of associated with these. So if I can get my screen to work. Okay, so the first thing is just really that for director's duty is to act within the powers that are stated in the governing documents. So for yourselves, that's the Articles of Association and Memorandum of Understanding from what underpins what the company is about. And within that, there's set powers in terms of what the organisation can do and the powers of the directors. The next thing is the duty to promote the success of the company. So all the decisions that are made should be in the interests of furthering the company's purpose and promoting that. The next one is a duty to exercise independent judgment. So it's really good to get advice and in fact sort of professional advice if you're making decisions on certain matters. And in fact, I would say it's essential on some things, and to seek other views. But all the directors should be making their own independent judgment. They shouldn't just say, "Oh, I only voted on that because somebody told me to do that." So they've maybe had advice, but yeah, they're still making their own independent judgment on that. There's also a duty to exercise reasonable care, skill and diligence. So yeah, so basically this is again around sort of decision making again that you're kind of thinking and putting thought into the decisions that are being made, really. The next three are kind of related, really. So the first one is to avoid conflicts of interest. So in terms of, again, if there's any decisions which are being made where there might be a conflict of interest, and then linked with that, duty not to accept benefits from third parties, that again, that this might sort of sway any decision making. And then also you need to declare an interest if you've got an interest in any proposed transaction or arrangement. So for example, if Q and Review is I don't know, if they're taking on a new photocopy supplier or something like that, if you own a photocopy company that's supplying the photocopier, you need to declare that as an interest within that, so that is not swaying any decision that you're making. Okay, so going to go through the charity and trustee investments, the duties of sort of charity trustees now, and you'll see that they're very similar. So first one is that you need to act in the interests of the charity, and again, you need to operate in a manner consistent with the purposes. So so you might be doing basically everything that you're doing should be aligned with the charitable purposes. So you might have a really good idea to do something which is really worthwhile. So for example, you might decide that you're going to put some work into preserving rare butterflies on the Isle of Mull. But if that doesn't link in with your charitable purposes, then you shouldn't be doing that, even if it's a worthwhile thing. So everything you do should be directly linked to your charitable purposes. Again, you must act with care and diligence in the decisions that you take. And again, you need to manage any conflicts of interest between the charity and any person or organisation who appoints charity trustees. And then there's also some more specific duties that come under the Act for trustees. So the first is that you need to make sure that the details that you provide to the Scottish Charity Register are correct. So that's, if you can go online for all the registered charities in Scotland, and you can find information about that charity. So every year you're asked to return an annual update and a copy of your accounts, and there's information that the members of the public can go on and see and have a look, and you've got a duty to return that information and keep it up to date. So that's reporting to OSCR. OSCR is the charity regulator in Scotland. And financial records and reporting. Yes, sorry, go for it.
So that's very similar to the Companies House. I guess that making sure the details of a company are up to date at Companies House is very similar to making sure that the charity details are the same in the Scottish Charity Register. Is it the same kind of thing?
Yes, that's correct. So there's so it's very similar. So there's just slightly different requirements in the reporting, but it's similar types of information. So OSCR are actually going to be changing some of the information which from end of November. onwards, there'll be a little bit more reporting that is required. So, for example, there's going to be a few more additional questions. For example, you'll need to report like the number of volunteers that you've got and things like that. But yeah, it's very similar to the Companies House. So just in terms of there's annual updates that you need to give. So.
Okay, can I just suggest that the one primary difference is that Companies House asks you to register individuals for directors, and
yes,
OSCR doesn't allow that at the moment.
Yeah, that's true. So so they are legislation which is just.
My apologies, can I just ask it? So just in relation to what has just been said there, though, although you don't need to register the directors to OSCR, if Q and Review being a limited company, we still need to register any directors with Companies House. So there's almost this dueling up. So
yes.
So there's a certain set of regulations that are required because it's a limited company, and then that's overlaid with another set of regulations, if you like. So it's not. So in actual fact, Q and Review, if you like, has two full sets of regulations that it needs to respond to, not just one or the other. So one doesn't replace the other. You actually need to be working to both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay.
So I suppose in the last kind of I'm trying to think, well, probably certainly since I'm trying to think the date when SCIOs came in, which was it's a Scottish Charitable Incorporated organisation. They came in after this act, and so a lot of charities now register as a SCIO, which means they are incorporated, a bit like a company is incorporated, that they are incorporated. And for that, if you're a SCIO, you only have to report to OSCR. You do have a record which goes up on Companies House, which is automatically put up by OSCR, but in terms of reporting, it just goes to OSCR. So one thing to say is that there's been some legislation going through, and which has gone through Scottish Parliament and will be coming in over the next 2 years. For that, there will be they're going to set up a register of charity trustees, and for which will go online. That's probably not going to come in until I think probably 2025 though. But so currently at the moment, when you go onto the OSCR site, there'll only be one main contact who's the kind of contact, main sort of contact for the charity. So, but yeah, so there are some changes coming in, but yeah, we certainly we can kind of go through those sort of as and when those come in, if you need any further information about those. So the next one is there's fundraising. We've got a duty to comply with the requirements around fundraising, and just making sure that you're raising funds for the charity and complying with the requirements for that. Then also, next one is providing information to the public. If the public ask for certain information, so for example, a copy of your governing documents, you should be able to provide it to them. And on all of your publicity, all of the websites and stuff like that, you need to display your charity number as well. Okay, so that's all of the duties. There's again, we've got further information which we can provide on that. There's OSCR produce a number of guides, such as guides for charity trustees. So we've got sort of paper and sort of digital copies of those which we can provide, and there's different sort of, there's like an easy read version as well and a large print version as well, which I can pass some of those on to Alistair. But I just wanted to kind of, from the duties, just wanted to really go through sort of probably 7 what I would call sort of practical things that come out of that, sort of practical themes. And I think, so these are strategy, finance, people, meetings and members, policies and procedures, reporting, and then a general working together which we're going to cover. So just wanted to kind of go through each of these. And so some of these themes, I would certainly encourage, if you're having a board meeting, that some of these things should be on fairly regularly down on the agenda. Maybe not going to be on every single time, but yeah, I think these are just some of the themes that I thought would be good to kind of just explore as we go forward on these. Okay, so the first one is we're just going to have a think about is strategy. So the reason we've got this is because everything you're doing really as a charity should be in a manner that's consistent with fulfilling the charity's purpose. So so I think in terms of are you making a difference and are you fulfilling your purposes? I think it's really important to be able to have a kind of an overview, a strategic thing on that. Just everything that you're doing, you're thinking, yeah, is that fulfilling what we should be doing? And kind of does it align with that? So I'd really just encourage you it's really important that you're clear what your purposes are. That you should have a copy of your governing documents, and you should know what they say, and just be really clear. Yeah, what are the purposes, charitable purposes of the organisation, and how are you meeting these in sort of in practical terms, really. So a lot of organisations will have a mission, vision and value statements. You don't necessarily have to, but this can be quite a good way that everyone's on the same page really going forward. Everyone knows what the vision is going forward or what the mission is. And also values, that can be a really helpful thing as well for volunteers, staff, that whether that's treating each other with respect, or it could be a range of other things. So, and it can actually be really, if you don't have those already, it can actually be a really helpful exercise to get people together in terms of the board, but then also potentially some of the people who are accessing the service or some of the volunteers, and getting them to discuss, okay, what are the values that's important to you, and how can we communicate our vision going forward. And then also for strategy, setting objectives for the year or for the projects going forward. I think it's really good to kind of set what's our objectives for this year. We can't achieve everything in this year. What are the key things we're going to really focus on? And it's really good just to sort of have clear objectives really for that. So just thrown in a couple of cartoons, which I'll just describe. I'm aware some of this can get a little bit heavy. So got here several people that's what is possible looking at a flip chart, which might be a strategy meeting, and there's a very confusing diagram, lots of arrows on it, and the person presenting says that's okay. I don't know what this chart means either. So the main thing for this, I would say, is that I think it's really important that you do have a strategic outlook, but at the same time, let's try and make it straightforward and not overly complicated. Something that people do understand, and it's just really clear going forward. So one thing that's important to think about is just how do you know that your objectives, once they've been set, that you've been met? It's maybe good to have a think about what you want your outcomes to be. What difference do you want to see? So an outcome could be something like, maybe people are less isolated, or people have more access to information, and then indicators. How will you know that? So again, it could be things like maybe people having more social connections or attending more activities, and then have a bit of a think about how could you capture that, whether that's through conversations, it could be surveys, collecting information around that, and then really kind of acting and analysing that information. So the reason why I've got this in is because it's kind of coming from what's your purpose as an organisation, how do you know that you're fulfilling that, and then how do you know that you are making a difference, really. So it's definitely worth, as a board, spending a bit of time thinking about this. And I think if you're really clear on this as well, and you're putting in funding applications, then it's really helpful if you can try and stick to the same things in terms of what your outcomes are and what difference you're trying to make. If you've got lots of different funds, sometimes you can be drawn in lots of different directions and end up with trying to do about 30 different outcomes or 30 different things. Whereas if you're just really clear what your main ones, and then all the other projects can kind of connect to that. So the role of the board really is that oversight It's not less so in terms of the day-to-day stuff, but it's more that's guiding, kind of almost like a guiding light, the vision in terms of where you're going and what you're doing in terms of this. And then the other reason why this is really important to do this is because ultimately you want to be able to communicate with the public what you're about. You want to be able to communicate with your supporters and really inspire people to get involved, either as volunteers or even potentially fundraising. And also, I think it's really important to celebrate the successes that you've had and just be able to show the difference that you have made, and then also where there's challenges to inform people where there is a need or if there's a challenge as well. Okay, so just before we go into finances, which is a big one, just anyone does anyone want to come in on sort of the strategy one, or was that all okay? Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yep, great, fantastic. Okay, right, just go on to finances then. So this is a really important role for the board. So within, there's a need to maintain financial records, and there's a responsibility to produce annual accounts in the format that's required for as well, in your case certainly as a company, and then also reporting information to OSCR as well. And again, with the finances, just a reminder, there's a need to act with due care and diligence around these, and to make sure that you've got suitable financial procedures to protect the assets of the charity. And again, for the board, it doesn't necessarily mean that the members of the board are going to be doing everything day to day, but they need to be making sure that they are overseeing the processes that are in place for making sure that the finances are being managed responsibly and carefully. So just got another quick cartoon here. So we've got two people looking at a tent, and one of them saying, "I love what you've done with the budget-friendly meeting room." So, okay, finances a bit more. So budget, I think I would definitely try and set a budget for the year and for specific projects. Sometimes when you're working in the charity sector, that can be really challenging, because sometimes if you're not sure exactly what funding you're going to get in, or you're waiting for it at a certain date. But I would definitely try and set a budget at the start of the year based on what you know. And obviously you can have some caveats around that in terms of depending on what funding you get in. But it's really important that you've got a starting point that you can work to. And then as you go along, if you need to adjust that, you can do. Cash flow, again, if you can, it's having a cash flow when more money come in, when more money go out, and that's a really helpful tool as well. And funding, overseeing and identifying suitable funding, making sure that records are kept about what's spent, reporting deadlines, and whether there's any restricted funds. That means funds that you can only spend on a specific project, or whether there's unrestricted funds, basically funds that you can spend on a range of things, a range of activities. And also you need to comply obviously with fundraising regulations. So the board is, again, it's important to think that the board has got the oversight role of this, and in terms of keeping the records and doing the funding reports, it might again be the staff who are actually collecting all that information together in terms of the activities that they've done, but the board members should be overseeing that, and also potentially working alongside staff to submit those reports as well. Reserves, I think in terms of financial reserves, it's really important to think about what level of reserves you should have. It's often said that OSCR say that you should have 3 months worth of reserves. I was actually at OSCR had a day up in Stirling a couple of weeks ago where they were covering the strategy and going over some of the changes which are going to be coming in. They said on that day they don't actually say anywhere that it is the 3 months, and they don't actually give a specific time slot for that, but they do say that you should think about what level you need in terms of ensuring that the organisation can keep going. It can actually be really hard to build up reserves, and that's something we can always have a further think about that. The main thing I would say for that is when you are putting in funding applications, make sure that you're incorporating that they are fully kind of costed, and that you are the work that is being carried out is fully kind of covered as much as possible. But yeah, that's a whole other topic. You could get into a whole session on that, so we won't go down that too much just at the moment. And then the main thing for this is really for the board is to make sure there's a clear process in place for the staff. Staff should know what the process is for spending, the funding process, expenses, authorization, how much can be spent and where and who to go for authorization, and receipts and records, where these are stored, who can access those. And so the board should really be making sure that there's a clear process in place and everyone's clear on what that is. So that's quite heavy, that one. But next one is people. So the board have got just I suppose really a duty of care, I suppose, really, for support and making just to act with due care and diligence in terms of overseeing the staff. And so the key thing for that is really around sort of support and supervision of staff. So that could be making sure that the staff feel equipped to be able to do their job in terms of training, equipment, staff well-being, staff enjoying the role, do they feel fulfilled, do they feel supported? And for things like annual leave, days off, you need to make sure that there's plans in place. For example, if someone's on annual leave, who's covering, so that staff members not having to answer the phone or answer emails when they're on holiday, because that's not going to be a sustainable situation, and it's not a healthy situation going forward. So just need to make sure the board's responsibility is really to make sure that these things are in place. And we'll get onto that a little bit later on when we look at policies and procedures as well. So induction of staff, volunteers and trustees, all new staff and volunteers coming on should have an induction in terms of what's involved with being a volunteer, or the same for a trustee, what's involved if for someone who's come on to the board for the first time, just in terms of being a trustee. And so Oscar, I'm going to ask a little bit more about this in terms of some of the new reporting that's going to come in terms of induction of trustees as well. And then just making sure that all things are in place, such as job descriptions, that all staff and volunteers are just clear what their job descriptions are in terms of roles, and obviously there's all the things around sort of contracts as well. In terms of employee recruitment, so there's various sort of legal responsibilities, so just put there in terms of things like equalities. And also I think it's really important that the board is sort of setting the culture from the top in terms of how do they want to see the volunteers and the staff behaving and acting, and just being really clear that comes from the top in terms of setting a healthy culture where there's sort of respect and people feel valued and supported as well. And the final one is just really communication, making sure that there's good communication across, and everyone's clear why things are being done, and that there's channels of communication as well. Okay, next one is maybe meetings and members. So the governing documents that we mentioned before, so this is often called the Constitution, or in your own case, there's the Articles of Association and the Memorandum of Understanding, which are the governing documents of the organisation. So everyone who's on the board should have a copy of that, or know where to find it, or what it says. And it's also something that should be reviewed yearly. Again, Oscar are going to ask questions on this going forward. They'll say, have you reviewed, basically, have you reviewed your governing documents in the last year? If not, when was the last time you reviewed them? And if they've not been reviewed, certainly within the last three years, that will be flagged up, and there'll be that's something that you should really be doing kind of going forward. Meetings, so members meetings, so this is things like AGM, annual general meeting, EGMs, sort of extraordinary general meetings, which would maybe happen if there's another matter which has come up which needs to be discussed. So it's the board's responsibility to make sure that those meetings are happening and that members are aware about those and that they've had that information communicated to them. And the same for board meetings, that everyone's just really clear, how often does the board meet? Is it monthly? Is it every 2 months? So those should be scheduled in. Minutes should be taken at the board meetings, and it can quite often be helpful to have a non-staff slot at the end, which doesn't necessarily always have to be used, but it can be not just an opportunity if anything around staff contracts or staff training or supervision needs to be discussed. It can be a good thing just to have a short slot just at the end, just in case that's needed as well. So there's also a duty to keep up to date membership and trustee lists, and the board should be making sure that those are updated as well, and that all these things are being communicated really with the members. Okay, next one is policies and procedures. So again, just going to cover this lightly, but again, certainly at EDVA, we're very happy to kind of have further conversations or meetings around some of the things that are covered here, if it's something going forward that you feel that you need further information on that. So the reason why organisations should have policies and procedures in place is, first of all, to make sure that you're complying with the law in terms of, for example, mentioned before around equalities. Make sure that you've got a procedure that you will follow for that. But then also, just as an organisation, you want to be able to operate effectively. And often policies and procedures can feel a bit dry, but it can be a really helpful way just to make sure that everyone is really clear about how you're operating, that everyone's on the same page. So that people aren't turning around and saying, "Oh, I thought we did it like that. I thought we did it like this, or maybe we should do it like that." But it's been pre-thought through as much as possible, and that there's good reasons why things operate the way that they do. So probably the main. So there's a few different types of policies which is really important to have in place. So the first one's around sort of HR policies. So this would cover things like employment, volunteers. So this could include things like staff sickness or annual leave. There's a whole range of things around that. And SCVO, that's, which provides support to third sector and voluntary organisations in Scotland. They've got obviously a lot of they've got a lot of information on their website around including template policies, and they also have a HR support service which is really very good, and you can become a member of that if you're not already, and they can provide sort of assistance with some of these things. Then there's also operations policies, and this would cover things like health and safety, but also potentially things like complaints or protecting vulnerable adults. Governance, so this could be managing things like conflicts of interest or having a code of conduct that should be followed. And a really important part of the board is to work with staff just to make sure that practical things are in place from these, such as fire drills or insurance from these. So what I would say is that if you are reviewing policies and procedures, it's sometimes it's something which you should do periodically, but it can be quite a heavy amount of work to go through these. So one thing that the charity that I was involved with a few years ago, we went through and did a bit of a revamp, and what we did for that was we decided that the policies needed to be reviewed a bit. So what we did was we set up a smaller kind of what we called sort of subcommittee, who worked with the staff to kind of go through some of these in a bit more detail, and then they came back to the board with the policies, and they gave an overview, and the board were asked to have basically to kind of go through these, and if there's any sort of alterations or changes, they then fed that back to the group. And so that basically meant that there was a group of a couple of the directors who were working with the staff, but then they were feeding back to the board, and then the board signed off the final one. And that was a helpful way of doing it. And we did it over a period of probably about 6 months, where each meeting we just had a slot where we went through a few of the policies, and the subcommittee fed back to the board. So that could be one way to do it, where you are kind of going through and updating them. Next one is reporting. So this is maybe not something that you need to look at every board meeting, but it's just really just making sure that the board are aware of when the OSCA annual return is due and what's required for that, who's doing it, and the same for Companies House. And also if there's any other bodies that you need to report to. So it might not be applicable for yourselves, but some organisations will have to report back to things like the Care Commission or other bodies. But there might not be any additional ones for yourself. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm sure Alistair may know on that. You need to report any changes or sort of notifiable events sort of as soon as possible. So that's things like, for example, if you suspect that fraud has taken place, or another one could be if the organisation makes a substantial financial loss in one financial year, then you've got a duty to report that to OSCA as soon as possible. And so OSCA have got information about what is and what isn't a notifiable event on that. So, for example, another one would be if you had a lot of resignations from the board, and the number of trustees that you had went below the minimum required in your constitution. That would be another notifiable event, which you'd have to let them know. Okay. So you also need to just check that the charity number, again, which I mentioned before, is on all communication. So that's the main things for reporting. So the last one which I've got is working together. So we've just got our final sort of cartoon here, which is two people about to go into a meeting, potentially a board meeting, and one of them dressed up in a suit of armour. You look sufficiently armoured up for this afternoon's meeting. So working together, so it can be really good to work together in terms of I think it's really good to get a whole range of different views, but it's sometimes there can be conflicts, and one of the things is to manage sort of conflicts of interest, which we mentioned before. If there's anyone else who's got any conflicts of interest, should declare those. Collective responsibility. So it's really important that the board has that collective responsibility of working together, and that there is collective decisions which are being made. And it's really important as well to be kind of clear of roles and responsibilities of who's doing what, and just try and avoid sort of misunderstandings. Mentioned subcommittees before. That can be a useful way of just, I suppose, digging deeper on a few issues and being able to sort of move things forward and progress things. But it's really important on subcommittees that the subcommittee is really clear of what the remit is, and they're not going off and doing something else. And it's also really important that they report back to the board, and the board has the final say on signing things off, and that if that going to a vote when needed on that as well. So on the subcommittees could be made up of anybody that the board has delegated that to. So it could be directors, it could be staff members, or it could even be volunteers who are involved in that. But they do need to report back to the board on that. There's lots of support out there. In terms of, already mentioned SCVO, there's, I suppose, ourselves at EDVA. So, and it's really important to kind of seek external advice where needed. And yeah, I would definitely encourage you to go for that. Or it could be in terms of if you're needing specific financial advice, whether that's from an accountant or from someone else. I'd encourage you, yeah, if you feel that you need more information or advice on something, to go for that and get it. Next one is disagreeing agreeably. I think there was I'm not sure if it was a TV series or a radio show called Disagree. I'm not sure it was called Disagreeing Agreeably, but that was sort of exploring how you can. I think it was exploring how you can have a good argument, but in a constructive way. I think it's really healthy to have a good range of views and opinions. If everyone thought exactly the same, then that can sometimes you can end up in a bit of a silo. So it's really good to have differences of opinion, but that needs to be done in a constructive manner, and it needs to be done in a way that is, I suppose, ultimately furthering the interests of the charity, of the purposes. So it's really important that where you are having disagreements and a variety of opinions, that you do that in as a constructive way as possible for that, and that you've got that duty to kind of find a consensus kind of going forward as a board, recognizing, yeah, we might have differing views, we've maybe had to seek some external advice on this, but ultimately going forward we need to find a consensus going forward. And I think one important thing just to say for that is that respecting that it is a collective decision that the board is making, sometimes some decisions are just, sometimes things are very clear that, yeah, there's a right answer or a wrong answer, or you'll maybe get an expert advice which will give a very clear direction. Sometimes there can be good reasons for going in one direction or good reasons for going in the other, and there's genuinely good reasons for making a decision one way or another. I think once the board has come to a decision, I think it's really important going forward that people do respect that everyone has made that decision in the best interest of the company, that they've sought advice on that, and it's good to respect that going forward, rather than kind of, yeah, going back and at every point saying, oh well, I didn't want to want to vote on that anyway, I didn't want to make that decision. And I think that it's good for everyone to have their say, and we'll get onto that in a little bit when we look at board meetings in terms of making sure that everyone has their say. But in terms of going forward, I think it is respecting the decisions that have been made collectively. It can be a helpful way going forward for that. Okay, so just before we get on to committee roles, does anyone have any sort of questions or anything that anyone wants to come in on just some of the things we've discussed so far?
Again, Luke, could I just remind everybody that tonight's meeting is being recorded, and it will be, as we said in the emails that were sent out, and that we're actually putting this up on our webpage as a training resource. So again, we won't go into any detail, but this is all about training and how we can move forward.
Okay, thanks, Alistair. Well, I'll keep going for now, and we could always have a bit of a chat at the end as well if anyone wants to come in. So these are sort of committee roles or office bearers. So there's kind of three main what we call sort of office bearer role or committee roles, which would be chair and often vice chair. So the vice chair would often sort of deputise for the chair if they're not in, treasurer and secretary. But there can often be other roles, and which are stated within the governing documents or which are decided by the board. So it's important that you consult your governing documents in terms of the structure on that. And sometimes, the board will decide, okay, there's other roles that we do need to have within this. So for example, it could be often a pipe band or something will have like a pipe major and things like that, which are not strictly necessary, but they are in terms of helping that organisation to function. They help and they're often needed for that. So just the first one is the chair. So this person is they play sort of a leadership role really in guiding the organisation to achieving their purposes. And so just a few practical things. So they would often help to prepare sort of agendas for meeting in consultation with the staff and other trustees. They would be setting what the agenda is for that meeting, and also just ensuring that annual general meetings and EGMs are carried out according to the governing document. And they may also represent the organisation at external events, and often they're one of the banking signatories as well. And often they will sign things off on behalf of the board. So that could be in terms of whether that's funding or just a letter about something, even if it's a letter to the council about something or something around that. So to a certain extent, they're a bit of a figurehead role, but they also do have a sort of practical role, which is really important. So they're also, as the name suggests, sort of responsible for chairing meetings and making sure that meetings are run sort of as efficiently as possible, and that you're not going down too many tangents, which let's be honest, will always happen. But they're trying to keep the meeting on track as much as possible, and making sure that all the decisions that are being made are as democratic as possible, that they're following again, that they're following the sort of the decision making set out in the governing document, and that they're as fully sort of participative as possible. Yeah, so the decision making comes under that. Often under the constitution, they'll often have a casting vote if there's a split decision. And then a really important role for them is kind of assisting in finding common ground within the discussions. So they shouldn't really just be dominating with their own opinion, though they can share their opinion, but they really need to assist in making sure that everyone has a say, and then trying to find sort of common ground going forward. And also just drawing out, okay, what are the action points from this meeting going forward? What do we need to follow up on next time, or what needs to be done before next time? Okay. So the next one is treasurer. So it's an important point is that the board is the board who is collectively responsible for good financial management of the charity. It's not just down to the treasurer, but the treasurer's role is it takes the primary role sort of in assisting and advising the board in overseeing the finances. So they should take the lead on things like overseeing the banking and transactions and keeping accurate records, giving a report at each board meeting on what's the current financial position and any sort of key transactions which are happening, and then working alongside sort of the staff and other board members to draw up the budget and also prepare the books for the annual accounts as well. And they would typically often work with the person who was then doing the annual accounts, whether that's the accountant, and they would often work alongside them as well. So the secretary's role is responsible for. Sorry, okay. Sorry, was someone wanting to come in there? No, I'll keep going. And the secretary is responsible for the administrative tasks associated with the board. So this isn't necessarily the administrative tasks for running the organisation, which are often carried out by the staff. This is often more what the administrative tasks associated with the board itself. So that could be helping to organise the meetings, or dealing with the correspondence, or often they're also a cheque signatory as well, alongside sometimes the treasurer or the chair. And working alongside the chair to distribute paperwork, such as the agenda, prior to the meetings, and making sure that minutes are taken. And so they don't necessarily always have to be having to physically take the minutes themselves, so that is often the case, but they should be ensuring that that's happening, and that someone is doing that. So if they're not doing it, they should be working with the board to organise who is doing that, and also just keeping the register of directors and trustees up to date, and also membership list as well, and also working with the treasurer and staff just to make sure that, and the chair, to make sure that the required paperwork submitted sort of on time. So just a quick note that the term sort of company secretary has got a specific legal meaning, and just really for ensuring that regulations are complied with. So their duties really ensure that, so the reason I'm putting this in is obviously not all charities are companies, which in your case you are obviously a company, so you've got specific sort of requirements around this. Just so the company secretary's duty is to make sure that paperwork for meetings is prepared, that and overseeing procedures for the operation of the board, such as organising the AGM, and also providing information to the registrar of companies, such as updating the company's house information, such as changes in directors, sort of financial returns as well. So an important note is that the company secretary legally doesn't have to be a board or staff member. So if they are a board or staff member, then they would usually retain sort of the normal rights and responsibilities of a director, but they don't always have to be a director. And I had a quick look at your articles of association, and in those, I've not read them all, but I think in that it does say that the secretary will be appointed by the board. But I'd encourage you just to have a check on what it says on that a bit further. Okay, so just going to finish off with, this is the 10 key points for running your charity. So this is just from Oscar. So the first one is always do what's in the best interest of your charity in terms of going forward. Reminder, you need to act with due care and diligence, and just make sure that you do understand what your legal responsibilities are here that we've gone through at the start of the session here. If you've got any conflicts of interest, it's really important that you declare what those are, and that you've got a responsibility to make sure those are managed. So, for example, if there's a director who does have a conflict of interest which has been declared, he shouldn't be voting on anything which is involved with that, and he or she needs to make sure that they're not voting on that. And yeah, it's really important that you understand what your charitable purposes are as well. Next one is that you've got a copy of your governing documents and you know what they say. That you understand the financial position that your charity is in, and that you are kind of up to date with that. And that you know kind of going forward again, yeah, what your reserves are, what your current sort of spending is, really, that you're not basically that the finances of the charity are well managed. The information to Oscar is, and in your case Companies House, is submitted and on time. And also if you need to make any changes to the charity register, and again Companies House information, that is updated. And make sure that you give people the correct information when they ask for it. So this could be if people are asking for a copy of your constitution, that you're able to give that to them. Okay, so we've got more information if you need it. There's Oscar, I've got a really good guide called Guidance and Good Practice for Charity Trustees. And like I mentioned before, there's also an easy read version of that, and there's also a large print version of that as well. And then they've also got information on being a charity in Scotland, which can be found online, and there's also hard copies of that as well. I think I've already sent through we've got sort of basic committee skills, which I'd encourage you to have a look at as well. And again, we've got various other resources, and there's quite a lot more information on the Oscar website as well. So, right, I'm just going to stop sharing if I can come out of this a second. Have I stopped sharing there? Has that come out?
Yep.
Yes, that's come out. Great. Great. Okay, fantastic. Gosh, it's got very dark while I've been doing that. To put a light on. So I'm aware that is probably information overload. So what I would say is that I'm very happy to kind of come back to any kind of future board meetings if you want to kind of go over anything again, or if you want to ask specific questions. For example, if you want to ask on helpful. We mentioned, just to pick one at random, like policies and procedures or something like that. Or I'm very happy to also meet with anybody out with that as well, to look at that. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you at board meetings just to try and incorporate some of those into the agenda, so that you are thinking about some of those things going forward. But yeah, if you've got any questions now, happy to kind of answer any other questions. But yeah, that was quite a lot of information. So if you need time to kind of let it absorb in and then come back, that's fine as well.
Again, thank you, Luke, for doing that for us this evening. We're now at 9:15, everybody, and we promised everybody that we'd be finished by 9 o'clock at the latest. The other thing I would say is one of the things that we are most definitely needing to do is refresh everything, but most importantly, to find ways to do that refresh and to find the funding to allow that refresh to happen. So again, Luke, I suspect we'll be spending a lot of time talking to EDVA over the next few months, at least EDVA.
Okay, yep, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. Yeah, very happy to meet up. So that's fine.
That was really a very, very good snapshot of roles and responsibilities across a charity and business, and I think starting from the top down now, so we've had some conversations regarding funding and some of the barriers to updating. Interestingly, some of the barriers to updating the constitution caused by some of the handcuffs that the Q Review exists with due to its current lenders in certain areas, and I think that for me tonight has highlighted the need to, I think as per our last conversation, Alistair, actually, about the need to have a much more detailed look and update the constitution, and if there's other hurdles that we need to jump as a result of updating the constitution, I don't think we should be shying away from that. I think we now need to put the horses in front of the cart as far as that's concerned. Otherwise, we kind of find ourselves in a situation where we can't move forward as a charity because certain funders are saying, well, you need to reorganise your finance if you update your constitution, and clearly that's now in complete conflict with what's coming with Oscar, where they're insisting, understandably, that you review your constitution every couple of 3 years. So that for me is an absolutely key starting point, and probably in advance of any conversations on where we go next as an organisation in terms of what's happening with premises, what we're doing in terms of tenants, what's our focus and all the rest of it. I think that really the constitutional, what seems to me to be a constitutional blockade at the moment, absolutely needs to be unpicked as a priority, and I think everything else then flows down from there. Because at the moment, and I don't know the detail, but my suspicion is that you could look at the constitution at the moment and then try and go and shape yourself around a constitution that was fit for purpose when it was first written, back whenever it was written, but actually isn't fit for purpose today, and therefore we shouldn't try and reshape the charity around something that badly needs updated. So focusing on the update prior to the next bit, and I guess with the AGM coming up in November, that would be a very, very good time to be sitting down with a new constitution for the board to consider, prior to then saying, right, so in order to make this into effect, what are the hurdles? And then everything will probably cascade down from there. That would be, I think that for me, certainly that's become quite clear. If it wasn't already clear, it's certainly become clear tonight.
I think, Luke, again, that's again where EDVA most definitely can have a role to play in that, if it can be achieved in the next couple of months. The other thing is that, as Luke mentioned, we're also, Q Review is a member of the Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations. Next week is Members Week of SCVO. And if anyone is interested in attending any of their events, they're only available to members, but I'm allowed to give out our login details to our members, our own people. so as you can then log in to the site and you can then participate in these events. And again, I'm aware that SCV also has templates, Luke, that we can use around constitutional matters. And they also have, as well as your good resources, they've also got the governance team at SCVO that can assist with that process as well. The big problem is that we also need to clarify who wants to get involved going forward, and how we're going to achieve that as well. Okay. Does Bob and Margaret, do you maybe want to say anything further?
Well, I've just said to Margaret the other day, I think we have to have a look at our constitution now.
Yeah.
And give that a little update, because I don't think it's been updated for maybe 10 years. So I think the way we're going forward as a group ourselves, we have to have a wee look at our constitution and change it accordingly as well.
I think, Bob, if you
future,
go for it, Bob. Sorry.
Just to make it fit for purpose for the future.
Yeah. I think if you actually look online, I mean, in preparing for tonight, Luke and I were looking at various different setups, and I was highlighting to Luke that there is a well-known charity that Margaret and Bob, you and I both know, here in East Dunbartonshire, that their constitution hasn't changed for the same amount of time as ours. And again, they actually have a very similar constitution to ours, and that's again part of the problem, that I think there will be a lot of small charities that fall foul of the new regulations. So perhaps fate has stepped in here, and by raising these issues now, we can perhaps do something moving forward. But it has to be as the group of people that are going to be or are our board can review. So look, anyone else? Harold, do you want to bring anything up? You're okay. Ian, would you like to bring anything up? You're okay. Eileen.
No, I found that very useful, as Andy said, and I think it indicates the amount of work we've probably got to do between now and the end of the year. I would suggest, and I'm happy to help with any of that that I can, Alistair.
Thank you.
I think there are various things that possibly should be looked at, things that you can possibly diverse slightly, so it's actually makes Q&A review more friendly for everybody. I'm not saying it's not friendly, but there's other things which would help to make Q&A review stronger.
Yeah.
You know, go into different areas and make yourself more needed.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, it does.
Total agreement there, Margaret. We've actually spent this morning, or I've spent this morning talking to the Robertson Trust, and there were some issues there that were raised, and that again that revolves around the Constitution. So some funders are now also looking for change. And this afternoon, I've just spent the afternoon talking with a fundraising consultant, and again, he's highlighting some of the pressures that are now being put on charities. So again, you know, we need to look at how we're going to achieve all this and who is going to be available to do it. Because again, one of the issues we've currently got is that those people who are currently staff are actually funded to do specific jobs of work right now. And again, we need to sort out who's doing what and how we're doing it. But again, that's where the fantastic service that EDVA offers, East Dunbartonshire Voluntary Action offers, and Scottish Council of Voluntary Organisations offer, will be definitely something we need to look into and move forward on.
I mean, obviously, a lot if the staff is being funded, that funding is ring-fenced to the staff, so you've obviously got to report back to the funder to say how money has been spent. So, I mean, there's all that to look at as well. What are we going to go for? Where is the best place to get it? Now, the Robertson Trusts are usually quite good but there are other trusts out there as well that are as good, if not better. So it's just a case of finding it. Unfortunately, I'm a bit out of date, but having to bring myself up more for doing that. Basically from our own charity point of view. But yes, I think looking at the Constitution, making sure that you're diversing a bit would be a good idea.
Yeah, exactly. Can
I just, sorry, can I just have one? I'm trying not to mention it, but SCVO also offer an online training for individuals to do at their own pace, on their own time. It's called the Scope e-learning, and it's different modules. So it takes you through different modules about governance, financial management, fundraising, all of that kind of thing. So you can step through the parts of the training, and you can measure yourself on what your knowledge is and where you think the organisation sits. So I think that's always a good place to start as an individual. But there's also the Scottish Governance Code checklist where the organisation, where you can measure your organisation against the questions, and then the reports come together at the end, and the whole board can sit down and say, this is where our strengths lie, this is where our weaknesses are, and maybe use that as a tool to kind of drive towards the changes you want to make.
Good idea.
Alistair, you're muted.
I was just saying to Luke, back to you.
Okay, right. Well, I think unless anyone else has got anything else, then I think that's probably us. So thank you so much for being able to join you tonight. And if you've got any questions, please do get in touch. And like Karen was saying, there's some really good resources out there. So definitely really encourage you to kind of look into those, and on SCVO website. And if you're needing anything else, if you come and let us know as well, and we'll see how we can assist. And Margaret and Bob as well, if you're needing, I think you might have did you meet up recently with one of my colleagues? So I was going to say, if you're needing anything for the VIP group as well, let us know, and we can link in again.
Yes, we did meet up with Graham recently.
Okay.
But obviously funding is a good thing that we're looking for as well, and obviously to expand what we actually do. So yeah, but Q Review wouldn't be a conflict because it's something that would probably run in tandem with it. So, and the fact that the majority of us especially the board of trustees at a EDVIP, we are all registered blind, so we're trying to do it from a different angle from you for the fact that we can't see what we're doing, but hopefully we'll get there in the end.
Fantastic, Margaret. Thank you so much for joining in this evening. And I must admit, when I go to RNIB meetings, a great many of the people taking part there join using the phone function. So I really appreciate the fact you've also come on camera tonight. And again, we'll speak later about how to use Alexa and all these sorts of things, and our experiences round about that. And again, I don't know if you recognise the various voices earlier on this evening, but one or two of our star readers are here tonight. So you can give me feedback on them later.
The wife with the blonde hair and glasses.
That's Eileen.
Eileen, all right, okay.
Eileen's with us now. Howell's with us tonight, and Ian's with us. Ian reads a large chunk of the Kirky Herald for us. I hate to tell you that last week the Kirkintilloch Herald had a lot of information about planning, which certain EDVA members insist we record. And yes, you know who I'm, but bear in mind we're still recording at the moment. So basically, we've done a lot of that, and we've also got. I can tell you this week there was a substantial amount of births, deaths, and marriages in this week's recording, I believe. So the best of luck listening to this week's edition. So, hopefully on that note, guys. Thank you so much for all taking part tonight. As I say, we'll once we've edited out the blurb at the start, we'll then make this recording available online.
Cheese.
Cheese. Thank you, everybody. Good night. Oh, can't switch
Thanks,
off.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye.
bye.
Take care now.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thanks.